MSAD 27 Board of Directors. Roll call.
Keith Jandro.
Here.
Isabel Lozier.
Here.
Abby Pooler.
Here.
Toby Jandro.
Here.
Leroy McKenzie.
Here.
Gary Sibley.
Here.
Sarah Ashley.
Yeah.
Public participation. We're going to run this more like a regular meeting tonight. We're not going to have an open forum the way we did the last time with people just blurting out whatever, whenever. So if you'd like to speak, we don't have a sign-up sheet tonight, but right now will be the opportunity for any of you to speak. We're going to limit each person to probably about 2 minutes. Is there anyone that'd like to speak?
I would. Ready to go somewhere? Or can
Yeah, if you can stand up, just identify yourself.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Hart. I wrote each of the board members an email yesterday. I took on the role of school health advisor as of yesterday. And I served a little bit last year. So there has been definite changes in COVID since last year with the Delta variant, so I'll point out some of those. But the biggest thing that we found medically and socially, and I'm sure you guys found that as well, is kids need to be in school for their health, for their safety, and for good learning. And when you have something that's this catchy and will enter the school system, and everyone who is not masked has to quarantine, you're going to quickly end up with closed schools like Van Buren and Presque Isle and Caribou Garden had to do. That is not what we want for our kids, and I certainly don't want to see remote learning again. It's not good for them. The number of DHS cases that we had in pediatric offices last year was astronomical when people went remote. So to keep them in school with the way the current rules are, they're going to have to be masked, because that way if there's a kid that's positive, all the masked kids are going to be able to stay in school and not be quarantined. Even if most parents were to tell their children to mask, without a mask mandate, there is no way for a teacher to enforce that without it being impossible to figure all that out. So you can tell your kids that as a parent you want them to mask, but whether or not they're going to do it in school without a mandate is another question. So I understand that there's CDC recommendations about community transmission levels and when you go to full masking. And honestly, because as a medical provider, I'm advising on medical issues. Medically, I think they should all be masked indoors, mandatory, until the vaccination rate is above 90%. And the previous version we had of this was 75%. Delta is a lot more catchy. So the previous version we had for this, kids didn't really spread it to their adult family members very easily. That is different. Delta kids are super spread. So if we have outbreaks in the school that go to the parents, we're going to overwhelm the hospital. So then when you bring your kid in or your grandmother in to the hospital to receive care, the system will be overwhelmed. We're already having trouble transferring people to ICUs in the state. And Maine is one of the last states to really get an outbreak. Talking to Dr. Preston, who some of you may know because she recently worked here. She's now in Idaho. They are so overwhelmed in other areas of the country that they're receiving transfers from Oklahoma. And their hospital is 50% COVID patients. The average age is 45. And a lot of those young people that are in the hospital, some of them have hypertension, some of them are overweight, some of them have diabetes, but a lot of them are fit and healthy in their 30s and 40s and hospitalized. They're all unvaccinated, so hey, if we all get vaccinated, maybe we can go without masks. But medically, I recommend full masking. In addition, even though kids don't have a high rate of death with COVID, they do have a high rate of long COVID, which can impair their learning. There are children who are in high school who have had COVID mildly and go from honor student to unable to learn. So I'm here available for questions, as are the rest of my medical colleagues. Thank you.
Anyone on the board have any questions for Dr. Hart?
Actually, I have a question for Dr. Hart.
Sure.
How drastically has the situation changed since last Monday?
So right now, the hospital has, and Dr. Roberts is on call this weekend, so she can also speak to that. The hospital has 5 inpatients with COVID, which, 6, sorry, it's up to 6 now. 2 of whom are still in ICU. Yeah, I was only in work this morning. But, and those are all COVID patients, which is higher than we've ever had, even in the beginning, all last year.
That's the 2 transfers out to other facilities because they were too sick for our ICU.
Right. So, 8 local community members with COVID bad enough to be in the hospital. The ER has been on surge status several times already since last Monday.
And we had some positive cases in the respiratory clinic this week as well.
Right. Yeah. I've had a bunch of patients with positives. A lot of them do okay, but there's this many already who have it. And we're a small town. Having 8 people with the same kind of illness all in the hospital at the same time in the St. John Valley, it's just starting. It's going to get bad.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Paul Pelletier. I work with Fish River, and I want to let you know what we're seeing at Fish River on the outpatient side. We've had 2 new positives this week, so we have a total of 3 new positives that we're following for outpatient COVID. And based on the epidemiology and the characteristics of these patients, it is the Delta 9 variant that we're seeing, which is more worrisome for children. I truly support masking in the school. I think that's very important. Masking works. And so, yeah, the other thing I'd like to say is it's a difficult time in the, it's a difficult decision to make, but to keep the kids safe and to keep them in school, we're facing a new, the situation's different. The situation's different now than it was 6 weeks ago. It's different than it was 2 weeks ago. So I think we need to do everything we can to keep the kids in school, in person, and safe.
What's that?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lynn Ford, and I teach their grade at Fort Kent. First and foremost, I went into education because I love children, and there's nothing more important than their well-being. So I can't stress that enough. And no, I'm not a medical professional, but I consider myself one in education. And although I totally agree that we need to keep our kids safe, numbers are on the rise, I guess I just want to bring out a different point and ask the board something. So if we move to mask mandating, does it have to be black and white? Now, first and foremost, kids stay safe. Scenario for you. I'm a vaccinated person. If I'm teaching and I'm instructing my class, 6 feet away, social distancing, following all protocols. If I'm instructing a lesson or reading a story, can a vaccinated teacher keep that social distancing and do that lesson and read that story? And I'm not speaking for all teachers, I'm speaking for my team. One of the reasons we got vaccinated was because it was important to us to keep our learners safe. So that is in our forefront. But elementary education looks different than maybe it does with older kids. They need our face. They need to see us pronounce. They need to see us read. They need to see us smile and know that they're doing a good job. And I will say this, in all my years of teaching, last year with the full mask mandate, we saw kids sliding into depression. Children were withdrawn, a lot of anxiety. Our social counselor couldn't keep up. And I understand that COVID is real, and like I said, children need to be healthy and safe. That is important to me too. But I also feel like it's not just black and white. If we can follow protocols, and really work to keep our kids safe, can an elementary teacher do their job in certain circumstances without a mask? If I'm working in a small group, one-on-one, absolutely. No question, I will put it on to keep my kids safe. But is this something that we can look at, especially for those of us that are vaccinated? The other thing that I want to throw out is, if our numbers do begin to drop, are we going to reconvene and explore the optional choice as well? Being a teacher, I 100% support whatever decision a parent makes. And I have 4 children, I have grandchildren, so I'm in it too. But I also believe if those numbers decline and we get to a different spot, can we come back and talk? Because the thought of going another full school year with our learners masked does concern me if we're in a safe zone. Because the social emotional piece is real, and that's a concern that we have. So I guess in a nutshell, I get it, I'm all about it. There's nothing more important to me than my learners. But with that being said, can we look at specific scenarios in which if it is a safe situation and a teacher is vaccinated, can a teacher instruct a lesson, read a story, and do what we do without having that mask on, and at least let our kids see us?
Peter, I think a board member wants to respond.
I just wanted to ask Gary.
Oh.
Gary, she had some questions for the board. Would it be appropriate to refer her to our medical person about how that works?
I suppose so.
So,
I think Dr. Roberts probably wants to touch on Lynn's question about the safe instances of teachers not wearing masks.
Yeah, sure. Yep. Hi, I'm Ellie Roberts. I'm one of the doctors at Northern Maine Medical Center. Lynn, it's a great point you bring up, and it's clear that everyone here ultimately wants what's best for the kids, and I think we have different ways that we're going about it. The thing about the unmasked for even vaccinated people, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable request if there's some clear guidelines on how that's going to be done. Like what you're saying, you're vaccinated, you're socially distanced. I think there's some place to have some wiggle room there. My only concern with some of that is that if it's not very clear what the rules are, then it's very hard to control that. The other part with the Delta that's very concerning is that even people who are vaccinated are able to transmit this, which we weren't seeing as much of with the previous less contagious and less virulent types of the virus. So that's a concern even for those of us who are vaccinated, hence why I am always masked because I also have a young child at home. And I don't have anyone in the school system that have a very big vested interest in this community, wanting to keep everybody safe and not wanting, and I'm a pediatric provider who sees children in the emergency department and not wanting to have to intervene with any of these kids here. Yes, seeing your face is important. I don't like delivering babies with masks on because we want to have that interaction with the parent. We want to have that kind of close connection. It's not forever. We've been doing this a year and a half. It sucks. I don't want to wear a mask anymore, but we have to dig deep and we have to protect, do the right thing, which is wearing a mask until we can have higher vaccination rates or until our caseloads are less, and that's not the case right now. Unmasking in the schools would be a mistake, and we will see kids getting sick. I want you to be able to interact with your kids and reach out to them and touch them and smile at them. I want to do that too with my patients. We're just not there yet. So we really have to understand how serious this is. All of us here are here because most of us don't even have children in the school here because we feel so strongly about keeping the kids absolutely safe, and you guys safe too. That's all I have to say.
I have one more point just about the distance and taking off the mask as a teacher when you're vaccinated, because you can still transmit it. And I've looked up previously when you project your voice, such as singing or projecting your voice in a rigid classroom, it's actually 6 feet a little bit arbitrary and probably not enough. But if you were to wear a clear face shield to interrupt airflow and 6 feet apart, and vaccinated, that would be the criteria that I would want. And, oh, sorry, and if you're wearing a mask, you can touch kids. Like, that's okay. So that's part of the issue is the lack of touch. But if you guys are masked, you can touch them. I think it's perfectly safe to hug someone and wash your hands. Absolutely.
All the time.
Yeah, we touch patients all the time.
Good evening, everyone. I do have a couple questions in regards of just a couple things I need, clarifying. If I know it was stated before that the children won't be wearing masks during recess. I don't think that's a requirement this year, is what they said, correct?
Correct.
Since this is a more aggressive variant, as we said, and we didn't need wore masks during recess last year, why would we go back on that this year and not wear masks during recess when they're, one, more active, they're closer to each other, you have higher aspiration, higher breathing, running around playing. That's my first question. And my second question is, has there been any of these cases transmitted inside a facility that is currently using masks all the time? Any of the newer cases that that you guys have mentioned, have they been transmitted?
Not that I'm aware of,
No.
that are being transmitted in fully masked
Facilities at all?
facilities.
I did have one that was transmitted in the workplace. I'm not 100%
Inside the
sure
hospital?
what their masking rules were.
Inside the hospital?
No.
No.
In the past, what we found where workplaces were pretty good about masking about on and up, it was when people would eat together and take their mask off that would be the issue. The school systems that have already started and other places in the country that have done the best have universal masking indoors, and they don't need masks outdoors because of the ventilation. We just understand it better. But they try to eat outside to help with that issue. So it's the one thing about universal masking, the hiccup is the cafeteria setting. So 6 feet apart inside, but if you guys can go outside for lunch on a nice day, that's even better.
Right.
Yeah, it's the ventilation. So like,
I know young kids and stuff playing together and playing tag.
it is. There is a risk there. The risk benefit, if you want to be 100% risk free, yeah, then mask outside. But risk benefit, just like having the teacher up front in the classroom with a face shield on, there's still a tiny risk there. But like outside, risk benefit, that would be okay with me. You're going to find other people who would say they should be masked.
So there's still a kind of a gray area there.
It's what typically happens in the outdoor settings that have had transmission, it's crowds. So like soccer games and
A lot of kids playing together.
right, yeah. So yeah, I mean, my kid's gonna wear his mask outside probably because he
Right.
always wears it and he doesn't care.
Right.
He's one of the few kids that had it on all day today correctly because he listens to me talk about people who are sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are my questions.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Collin, I teach here at Community High School. I'm speaking as a parent and a teacher tonight. Speaking as a parent whose child got COVID, as a parent whose child was the first one to get COVID. Love to say I was the first letter. And I can tell you that the damage to him mentally, the trauma that was caused by the fear that was put. If you have ever sat with your 9-year-old and had him cry and beg you not to let them die because they got it anyway, because they were made to be so fearful, that is what we are doing to them mentally. And let me tell you, it's not a place you ever want to be, because I still struggle when I think about him saying that. I struggle with him in our home, saying, Mommy, can I sit with you? Can I be near you? And you know what, the answer was yes. And no, we weren't masked, and I never got him. And I know I'm lucky. My daughter never got it. I know she's lucky. I can't impose enough. I know that Lynn is talking about the mental piece for our children. We have to remember that. This is not just a physical thing. The mental piece is real. Lynn had my son last year. He changed. He was not the same kid he was. I cannot push enough how important that is. And as parents, we need to be allowed to make that decision for our children. I can't watch that happen to my son again. We have to be given that right. We are their parents. Nobody loves them more than us. Not a doctor, not the school board, not their teacher. We love them the most. We have to be allowed to make the choices for them.
So I'm the parent of a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. Too young to be vaccinated. Too young to make better decisions for themselves. Too young to count on to wear their masks, even if I tell them. I hear what they're saying about your son being so upset, but I mean, we kept our kids home today because I don't feel safe sending them to school without people masks. Like, the masks work way better if the person who's sick is wearing a mask. So if it is optional masking, A, I have no confidence my kids will actually have their masks on, and B, even if they do, it's much less protective than if everybody wears a mask. And so I hear that you want a choice, but for me, I feel like it's infringing on my choice. It puts me in a place where I feel like I have to choose between my kids going to school and my kids being safe. And my kids need to be in school. I need them to be in school. But I need them to be safe too. So that's a really hard place to be in. And I think that school needs to be a safe place for everyone.
Hi, Josh Myers. I have 2 kids in school, 1st grade and 2nd grade. And, you know, a safe place, like you were talking about the mental and emotional toll, it's absolutely 100% true. I want my kids to be in a safe place and not to fear constantly. It should be a personal choice by the parents if we want our kids to wear masks or not. Not mandated, not constantly throwing the fear on them. We love our kids. We want to make sure that they're healthy. But I guarantee you there's a 100% chance, as I've seen in my kids, that they are mentally and emotionally suffering from not being able to see people's facial expressions, smiles, the stress, the constant fear that is being thrown at them. That is a 100% chance of it happening because it already has. I don't want it to happen anymore. It's not fair to the kids. The parents are dealing with it. We love our kids more than anybody else does. We weigh the risks and the benefits. It should be an individual family choice. My body, my choice.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I just want to say I'm one of the most tolerant people ever. I teach in this building, I teach upstairs, and it felt like 500 degrees today, and I kept my mask on all day long. I see both sides, I truly do. I do. I was watching the board meeting at home, and my son Ezra, who's in 3rd grade, said, "Mommy, we need to go." He dragged me here, not me. He did. And I'm so proud of you, Ezra. I agree that the social, emotional, academic setbacks are real. I've seen it in my own children. I have 2 in the district and 1 3-year-old at Mendix. But me teaching remotely in the basement while my kids run wild upstairs was very hard. It was very hard. Very hard. I would rather, today was a high for me. I had kids in my room, and it was real. And it felt really good to see them. I understand the masks are an inconvenience. but it is the most simple intervention we can take. Period. By not injecting ourselves with something we don't want to inject ourselves with. End of story. COVID is unreal. We have never experienced anything in our lifetime. It is compared to like a war where we really don't know what it's like until 20 years later and we look back, right? We are on the front lines right now. We are, and we don't even know it. But when we look back, we will say, I can't even believe we did that in our lifetime. And our kids are living this. I am pro-mask. I am vaccinated. I wore mine today for 2 reasons. One, because my kids are not vaccinated. All 3 of them are not vaccinated. And 2, I wanted the kids who wore masks today to feel like a teacher was on their side. Because there were several kids who wore masks today. And I did not want them to be bullied, which is my greatest fear in education. And I see it every day. I see it every day. So if I wear a mask, and most students like me, I think, then maybe 2% of them thinks it's okay. And they won't tuck it in their pocket and feel like they're going to be bullied. So for solidarity, I will wear it. I understand both sides. I truly, truly do. But if I have to go remote, I will go bananas. I will. I will cry like I did every day last year. I am here today, and I haven't cried today. I am here, and I'm doing my job 100%. I sweated bullets all day long, but those kids smiled all day. And I went home today, and I felt good. And it was worth it. I took a shower, and I'm sweaty again, but I don't care, because it only lasts 8 months. Okay? So Ezra, thank you for bringing me. He's the only student here that I look around. I'm sure there's some watching right now with their parents. And he told me the minority wore masks in his room today. And that's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Like, I'm not judging. I don't judge. But I strongly feel it is the simplest intervention we can take to get kids in the building. And that's it. Boom.
Ezra, I'm proud of you too. And I am Ezra's teacher this year. And yes, it was the minority. And I did not hear one student make fun of any other student for having a mask on. We talked about it. We talked about how it was personal choice. And I also many times throughout the day said to Ezra and to the rest of the boys and girls, this may be the last time you see this face, but know that under this mask, I am smiling at you, and I care about you. And so we did a lot of talking about it. So we didn't have the bullying. We did have students who were wearing and students that weren't wearing. I did choose on day 1 not to wear my mask. I chose today to socially distance and make sure I was back away from my students and not infringing on their space. Because today, on day 1, I did want my little 3rd grade learners to see this, to hear me read, to see the way that I act out the stories that I read, to really see who I am as a person, and a teacher, and a human, and everything else. I'm just going to reiterate what Lynn Ford said, and that was, we understand the safety of it, and we do care, and we do want to keep those children safe. So we're not fighting the mask. We do want to ask again that we consider some other options for parts of our day, because today, as an 8-hour day, we probably spoke 6 of those hours, and my voice is already taking its toll. And so we would just really ask if we could set up some really, important guidelines on how we could. A shield is fine if we can set up those things, if they could just see me. I am feeling much better after hearing you say I can touch them. Because that last year was the hardest thing. When your student asks for a hug and you say, I can't, Today I had a little girl ask if I'd hold her hand as we walked down the hall. And I said, I don't think I should. I said, and she said, what, why? So it's all of these things, and I said, well, COVID is still real. And we just washed our hands, and we're going to the cafeteria. So it's a lot of a social, emotional, a lot of talking, a lot of teaching. But I do, and I think you will find many teachers are very pleased to hear you say that we can, if we are masked, touch our students. Today we did a high five or a fist pump, but then the hand sanitizer a second after, So thank you for sharing that, and I hope that that is something that we can put into place. But I still do wonder if we can work together to find a way I can find a space that I'm 10 feet from my students to read aloud to them. I will change around my room to find that space. But there has to be a moment during that day where I can see this, I can do the lesson or the thing. I don't know if I'm the only one, but when some of you are speaking, I had a very hard time, even with your microphone there, understanding what you were saying. And I can make it out because I'm an adult. But when you're teaching these young ones new concepts and ideas and brand new material, they really need to hear it. And they hear it multiple times in the phonics so all of those things, I just ask that there be some help in us being able to do those things. But absolutely, when we're in that zone of proximity, that we mask up. We have no problem with that. Teaching a small group with a mask, that's not as challenging. But projecting your voice for 6 hours in the front of the room or in the back of the room or any of those things are extremely challenging. And then, like you said, the heat today was, and tomorrow's worse, and the buildings didn't cool off at all. So that's where we're at. So, thank you.
I'll keep it short and sweet. My name is Cindy. I have 2 students in high school, so I can't really have an opinion about the grade school. Thank you, these teachers. You guys are awesome. I've had experience with all 3 of you spoke, and you are wonderful teachers, and we are very blessed in this community. As far as Dr. Hart was saying, if we were wearing a mask, we wouldn't have to quarantine our kids. That was not true last year. The kids did have to quarantine, even though they were wearing a mask. In the schema, they did go remote, even though they were wearing a mask last year. So that is something to think about. Of course, this is real. As far as the high school level, it is a little bit hard or different. These kids are playing sports together. They are working together in many different businesses. They are hanging out together, and they will continue to be hanging out together. And if any of you have kids, look on Snapchat and see all the stories. They are not wearing masks. So it is a little bit silly to have it on at school when they're not doing it besides school. Like I said, I don't know what the parents are doing at the grade school, but just a thought process. And of course, it depends on what the survey says, what people want and need. I will respect either decision. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm out of breath a little bit because I ran over, and how lucky am I to live across the street, right? So I ran over basically because I heard a lot of discussion about social emotional needs and the effects of mask wearing, and I figured I really need to be there. I'm in the schools, I'm the mental health therapist, I'm Andrea for the few of you that might not know me. I'm the mental health therapist here at Valley Rivers Middle School and High School, and I certainly don't know how COVID and mask wearing has affected 100% of our students, but I can promise you that I know our students, and I speak to all of our students, and I have seen an incredible enhancement in mental health issues. What I did want to clarify is it is for so many reasons, and I cannot testify that that's mask wearing. I can testify that that's homelessness. I can testify that this is domestic violence at home. I can testify that this is families losing their job and living and bunking up with others. I can testify that on my first day of work today, I made 2 child protective calls and met with 2 homeless students. I can testify to the effects of COVID. I cannot testify that that's from mask wearing. I cannot testify that I've had one student discuss their emotional distress because of mask wearing. Can it be happening? I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm saying with the students that I'm working with, it is COVID, but it's so much more than wearing a mask at school. My biggest concern as a mental health therapist is going remote. I lose my children. Think about the kids that I made those reports on today. Think about the students that are homeless. Think about all of these students that when we are remote, we lose them. And I worry about them, and what's my option? I try to call. I try to Zoom. I think about them every night. It keeps me up at night, but what can I do? So my greatest concern is us going remote, and if there's anything that we can do to keep us from going remote, I vote for that. I also, as a parent, so I'll just switch gears really quickly. As a parent, I have a son with chronic respiratory problems. I think, I agree that being able to have a choice to choose what is safest for your child. I will say, it's really, really sad for me to know that your choice could cost my child being ill, and I would hope not their life. And so, as a parent, I think about my son, and you know, like we talked about it today, he and a lot of his friends were masked, about 1/3 of the kids were masked. That's what he and his friends told me after school or whatnot when they came here to see me. But at the same time, I think with the levels that the medical personnel have told me at work, that the place that we're at right now, I think masking is our only option. I also agree with Tamara and Lynn that when we're in more of a safe zone, yes, let's look at it. I think we do need to look at the best option for our kids. But right now, I'm worried on so many of those issues.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I'm here to speak both as a concerned parent and also as a bit of a subject expert. My name is Kennedy Rupert Mason. I have a PhD in toxicology from the University of Wisconsin, and I currently teach chemistry and environmental studies over here at the University of North Kent. One point I'm going to make first and foremost is that I support universal masking indoors. I know some of us don't like that. I don't like wearing it that much either. The evidence says the mask is a barrier that tremendously cuts down on transmission of COVID. The more people that wear it, the less transmission you have. Vaccines are also a barrier. Not everybody is eligible. Right now, we have the Delta variant COVID. There's more community transmission because of Delta variant. Again, we wear masks, even when we're vaccinated, we're much less likely to catch COVID and then transmit it to people like our young children, like I have myself, who cannot yet be vaccinated. And I also want to point out, I know there's been some concerns voiced about the psychological impact of mask wearing. I think we perhaps all need to have a conversation that the mask is intended to help keep us safe, and it's not a guarantee, but on average, there's going to be less people getting sick. We're going to be able to share in our experiences going to school, see our friends more often. The last point I'm going to make is at the university, we reinstituted universal mask wearing in indoor spaces. I support that to the schools. I also saw my students at the university who got quarantined last year, they were utterly miserable, stuck in an isolation room for, at that time, 2 full weeks. They could only engage on Zoom and social media. But again, universal mask wear indoors is really going to help cut down on that transition so more of us can stay in school. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Cameron Grange, and I have the privilege of, besides being a doctor, I have 5 children in school. 2 and a half in elementary, 1 in middle school, and 2 in the high school. I also have a master's in public health. And one of my favorite quotes is from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who says, the antidote to fear is knowledge. So, I'm just going to mention that masks, while they're a great defense, aren't the only defense. It's a layered defense. And instead of thinking of a mask like an air filter for your car that protects the engine from what comes in, it's a muffler. It collects what you breathe out, so that way it's not floating around. The air that you breathe comes in through the cracks. This is not a mask that protects me from the air in the room. This is a mask that protects everyone else from anything I might be breathing out. And because of moisture and particles, what I breathe out into my mask isn't likely going to come back in, because I'd have to breathe really hard to dislodge those particles, and it's much easier for the air to flow away. Now, masking is important, but only in tandem with social distancing, only in tandem with hand washing. The more layers we add, the more safe we are. One of the concerns that I hear from my patients, especially patients who have medical conditions, is that if everyone isn't wearing a mask, the environment is unsafe. That's the issue. That's the choice. The choice you make to not wear a mask isn't for your health, it's for the health of those around you. That's the issue. That's the knowledge piece we need. So, again, it's a layered defense, and the more we understand, and we know more about COVID than we did last year. And we're able to talk about physical contact with children. We're able to talk about outdoor without masking is safer because of air concentrations and air movement. We're able to talk more about it because we're learning more. Do we know everything about COVID? Absolutely not. Do you know everything about the Delta variant? That's throwing us for a loop. And not a happy loop. It's more effective. But at the end of the day, if we're not going to do universal masking, that takes away that defense. Again, it's not an air filter, it's a muffler. And it's a cornerstone of the defense of spreading not just COVID, but every respiratory virus. And I'm sure all my colleagues could say how little RSV and influenza they saw this year until universal masking went away. And then we saw it spike. Oh boy, did it. So, as a parent, I'm concerned for my children. 2 of them cannot be vaccinated, and that the 3 have been vaccinated, but still, that's not. We send them into an environment that, because of other people's choices, unsafe. So, again, I would challenge you. The last 2 things I want to say is, 1, I challenge you to rethink how you think about masking. And second, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't trust the CDC. I don't trust the FDA. I don't trust so-and-so. I don't trust the source. Well, then what source? Well, I challenge you to think about what source do you trust and why. You know, and it's hard to verify a source. It's easy to say, oh, I like what they say. Yeah, that aligns with what I believe, so it has to be true. No, it doesn't. It's really hard to verify a study, it's really hard to make sure that what a guideline says is applicable to this population, to this group, and that it was set up the right way that you can trust the data. So I get that. But rather than saying I don't trust the FDA, come out with, well, what would you trust? And know that not all studies are equal. Meaning, double-blinded random control or triple-blinded is a tool to test certain things. Not everything. That's like using a screwdriver as a hammer. So know what tool, what study is, what the tool is for. Know how to verify it. And it's a lot of work. You need a lot of background to do that. And so if you don't have the time or the resources to do that, find a source you trust. But be selective. Don't just say, I like, it resonates with me, so that's what I'm going to go with. Come up with criteria beforehand, and then verify that source yourself. So that way you can trust it. I would hope that your healthcare providers, especially those of us who live in the community and care for our neighbors, are someone that you can trust. And one of the other hats I wear is I'm the chief of medical staff at the hospital. And every provider there supports universal mask. So I've heard a lot of people say I'm not a doctor, but I am a doctor and we support universal masking. Is it the only defense? No. Is it part of the whole? Yes. Is it one where if everyone doesn't wear it, benefits are thrown up? Not 100%, but most of the benefits are lost. So, again, we'd like to have conversations. We'd like to have people come to us with questions so that way we can answer them. And present the data, not just say this is what I think, but this is what the data says and why. And this is where the data is coming from. This is how we got the data. That's part of why we like what we do. So, again, the antidote to fear is knowledge. And yes, COVID can be a scary thing, but if you know how it transmits, if you know how to prevent it, that takes away a lot of its fear, a lot of its power. Thank you.
Apparently the Zoom link isn't active anymore. Dr. Wong is not here, wanted to say something. Is it okay if I call him? He's one of our ER doctors and see if we can hear him.
Is he going to offer anything that we haven't already heard from one of the medical professionals? Huh?
Yep, it is.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, you can talk.
Good evening, everybody. Odds are that I probably treated one of you guys or a family member or one of your neighbors. So if not, that's generally a good thing. People don't come to see me really well. My point, I'm going to try to come at this in a different way than the other physicians here have. I have two main points. One is primarily addressed to the parents in the crowd. I saw a lot of the people who spoke already mention that they were parents. At this point, it's mostly geared towards you because I think it's important that you guys know a little bit more about what happens behind the scenes if somebody comes in and needs to be into the hospital with COVID from my point of view. So I think it's important to show you things a little bit behind the curtain. The Zoom call died, so or got closed for some reason, so I can't see anybody anymore. But so scenario. Let's say that your kid develops symptoms on a Saturday night. Nothing's open. They don't look right to you, so you bring them to the ER and get checked out because it's the only place that's open. In this example, let's say that they test positive, unfortunately, and they're sick enough that I think they need to be in the hospital. So it may surprise you to learn that that's kind of the easy part. But the part that I want you to know is that if your child is that sick, there's a 1 in 3 chance that they need to be in the ICU, and there's a 1 in 20 chance that they need to be put on a ventilator, according to studies that have been done looking back at the cases that we've had in pediatrics. We don't have either of those here. We don't have the staff, we don't have specialist doctors and nurses necessary to do the best possible care to a kid who is that sick. It's not for lack of care. Trying, it's just a simple fact of living in a rural area like this that there aren't enough specialists. So the closest options that I would have are Bangor, then Portland, then Boston. If one of those is full, I move to the next one. Talking on the phone with those people can take an hour or 2 waiting. All of these options would involve Life Flight as well. Life Flight has to come up from Bangor, and they're usually busy on another transport in the meantime. So it will take minimum 3 hours or so for them to get there if they're free. If not, it can be 6 hours overnight. Your kid is staying in the ER this whole time. So the point that I'm making, once Life Flight gets there too, you can't go with them in the helicopter because of the restrictions. Now your kid's been transferred to a hospital far south. However many hours later, you have to figure out how you're going to get down there, take time off work, all the other stuff. This is a pretty bad scenario. But it's exactly what I would do and have done, and this is what really happens. The counter argument to this point is probably that most children that get COVID aren't going to need to be in the hospital, which is true. I'm not going to deny that it's statistically true. But if you could do something to slow the rate at which kids get COVID, wouldn't you? And I hear the points about social interactions and when it's seeing people's faces and making emotional connections, and that is important. But I would argue, and sorry I didn't get the person's name who spoke. I think they were a social worker for the middle school or the high school, talking about how they can't say for sure what the effects of masking are on kids' emotional development, but they know for a fact that families who have been affected by COVID, kids not being able to go to school because the schools have been shut down and the increase in domestic violence and all the other stuff. We've seen that too. And that's the point that I want to make with this first point, is that, yeah, like, it's an unknown versus unknown. And no known means already going to be worse. So that's one. The second point I want to make, and I'm not sure if anybody made this already, is about hospital bed availability as a whole. My last shift I worked in the ER, I had a patient with a heart attack. A heart attack is, what most people should and do consider a real emergency, right? Definitely go to the ER. I tell people to go to the ER all the time with chest pain, get checked out, make sure it's not a heart attack. This patient had a heart attack. Confirmed. Had PG changes, had blood work. That was having an active heart attack. He was sick enough that he needed to go to a bigger hospital and get a cardiac catheterization when they put down things going on. Eastern Maine was full. Central Maine was full. Maine Med in Portland luckily had one adult cardiology bed left. One. He went down to Maine Med and he had open heart surgery later that week. So the big hospitals in the whole state are full. And a large part of it is people with COVID who need oxygen or ventilators or other care they can't get at home. It's not entirely that, of course, people are still getting sick with stuff like this, but there's a large strain on every hospital in the state right now because of this, because of COVID, because of this extra load feeding. If that patient didn't get lucky, you would have waited upstairs in a hospital for a bed to open up. No, beds open up at hospitals when either when somebody gets transferred to a bigger hospital, they get discharged because they're not good enough to go home, or they die. So what happens when the biggest hospitals that are available to us with the most specialists are full? We're there. It means that if you get into a bad car accident and you need to be isolated out to Bangor to Portland, there might not be a place for you. It means if your mother has a really bad stroke and needs specialist care to remove a clot, or has a heart attack, or needs a major surgery, there might not be a place for her. Where I'm relating back to this discussion is that we know that kids shed the virus just like adults. So if your kids not wearing a mask, again, the point that the other person, one of the speakers before me was making about masks don't protect the wearer, they protect people around the wearer. So it's not the argument that it should be an individual choice doesn't really work here. It's a lot of it. It depends on everybody doing something to protect the people around them. So if your kid's not wearing a mask, they catch it, they bring it home to you because other kids in the class aren't wearing masks. They might be fine if they're a kid. You might be fine, but how many people are you going to pass it on to? Do you have parents living home with you? Now really, how sick are they going to get? Who do they contact? How many friends did they see? It's all about reducing the rate of infection. If people wear masks, including kids, less people catch the virus every day. Less people are therefore going to be sick enough to need to go in the hospital, and that's become available. So the second point is that instituting a mask mandate would, in some small but definite way, slow the rate of community transmission. The only thing I really gain from having your kids wear masks is less sick kids, less adults, and more ability to give you and your loved ones the care that you need in a real emergency. I still think about it. Like, we got lucky. And that, I don't know what we're going to do in the future if it can get worse, which I'm afraid we're going to. So, I guess to summarize, if the majority of doctors are recommending something and doing results, hey, just please ask yourselves why that is. Ask yourselves if the information that you base your views on is coming from people you trust, or if it's coming from, I don't know, other sources, the internet, somebody who makes money off of you listening to what they say. And ask yourself that, and this is more for like the school board members who are listening here, if you don't trust the doctors in the community about this, when we're saying that this is what we recommend, why? Why do you trust us about anything else? So I don't want to see you, I don't want to see the kids at work, because if, kids and adults don't mask, people don't get vaccinated, people don't take steps to protect each other, I may have to tell you that I can't help you when you need the most. Because you guys in the school board have control over a small piece of this, and you heard what we have to say at this point, so just ask that you do the right thing. I had a postscript. I emailed Dr. Jarvis, who leads in command, senior physician at Eastern Maine, and sent me an email to Dr. Hart's.
I sent it to all the board members.
You sent it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong.
That's all I got.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for any of the speakers?
I have a question for, I have a question for Dr. Hart. You had talked about, you recommended universal masking, period, not based on transmission rates, or I guess at what point do you have a proposition for at what point we can remove masks?
I guess I don't mind removing them and making them optional once it gets down to low, but I actually think the CDC guidelines, when it says there's like 2 categories on the high one, like, thanks. Like there's like where it recommends universal masking and then where it mandates, they're like really strongly, both of those should be universal. Like both of those. It has to be low or non-existent to take them off.
Instead of a recommendation, just a mandate.
Yeah, like the orange should be mandatory. I honestly, medically, I know you guys have to balance what people want also, but medically you shouldn't take them off if it gets down to blue.
So you would propose mandatory universal masking, red, orange, and yellow?
Yeah.
And then optional at blue?
Yep. But like I said, that's just the medical piece. You guys gotta balance all the things. And all that being said, I stick by the 6 feet with a clear face shield for a vaccinated teacher to be able to show her face to her kids. They're vaccinated, correct.
What about, and you mentioned something about lunch outside where possible. I know in the spring there was some requirements about everybody had to face the same way, and there was different.
Right.
We haven't gotten any different guidelines, I don't know if we have.
Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, the US CDC guidelines for lunch is at least a 3-foot distancing. There's no mention about direction. So what our principals have done is diagonal seating, 3-foot distancing. You're not facing anyone, but you're at a 3-foot diagonal distance.
I mean, it's reasonable. I mean, if there's the ability to go outside, that'd be better. I don't know if that's technically possible. So, I'm suggesting something coming onto the job yesterday.
And at this building, they actually have 6-foot, if you look behind you on the bleachers, they have 6-foot distancing on the bleachers for eating, for those who choose 6-foot distancing.
That's my question.
I mean, at MSSM, where my older child goes, my younger child's here, they're at a 90% vaccination rate, and they still universally mask inside because they're not screwing around.
There was something that I thought of and it's gone. I'll pass and hopefully it'll come back to me. I'm sorry, I had a question about the colors and it evaporated. Oh, wow. One of the problems that I think we have, and we have had, is an informational problem. If you would have seen me last week, I was not wearing a mask. Anyway, because everything was fine, I thought. I wasn't hearing anything, I wasn't getting any feedback. I mean, we used to have this thing from the hospital in Fish River, and we don't have that anymore. And I'm not blaming anybody, but as we move forward through this, it's increasingly difficult to say that what we're doing is informed by our local issues. And I mean, people raised this issue at the last meeting. People who didn't agree with my vote, but I think it's a legitimate issue. If there's a huge outbreak in Holton and they got 1,000 people in Holton with COVID, Aroostook County is going to be bright red. But we're not Holton. We're a long ways from Holton. And there's 2 downsides to that. One, I don't feel like that's necessarily our community, necessarily a reflection of our community. And 2, it provides an easy straw man for somebody who wants to say, we don't need masks, it's not a problem here, it's a problem somewhere else. What can we do to combat that issue of information lag? Because I know when we get information from Maine CDC, it's stale. It's a week old. It might as well, it's only helpful if we were to have masks on and find out next week we're in green. Well, not a whole lot was lost. We lost a week of wearing masks for no reason. However, it goes the other way, we don't know and we won't know. is there something we can set up, regardless of what the board's decision is, to increase the flow of good information from our healthcare providers? Because when I heard what I heard about this weekend at the hospital, I was shocked. I was shocked. And I get, you don't want to advertise, everything's going to hell right now. But it gets out anyway. I'm not always confident taking information second and third hand. So I guess that's my question. It's kind of complex, but I feel like we're between a rock and a hard place. We were to a lesser extent last year, but it feels like it's worse now.
So I was a school board physician last year with all the babies. I thought it would be best to have someone who would be more present this year and be there. And we initially started doing local cases when we were first doing this, but with all of the new testing, all the sites of testing, all the different places people were reporting, we found it to be impossible and therefore inaccurate to actually inform helpful choices for the local scene. So the best we had was county-based. So I just wanted to say that piece of it, but I think that more communication is like the knowledge that Dr. Cameron had talked about to kind of help replace some of that fear. And I think Dr. Hart can work on that or talk to that about moving forward and having more communication between all of us.
So we had, because things were slowed down, we were excited too. We stopped masking in meetings. We were psyched, man. You want us to be able to get rid of masks, we're happy to do it. Not anymore, we're masking all the meetings, And when we had better communication, we also were, like she said, one of the only testing facilities. So we can't track Rite Aid, Walgreens, I still say Rite Aid. We can't track Walgreens, we can't track those things without this process. And that's kind of why I want to be masked for yellow, is because yellow goes to orange before you know it, and there's a delay. So that's why I want, that's my reasoning, I guess. I just stated that before, intuitively, but that's really the reason. I will do my best to communicate better. I have an advantage of being both the school physician and on the COVID task force in the hospital, so I can do my best. But we can't track all the tests. So.
If I could speak for Fish River, in regards to doing our dashboard, we did take down our dashboard when our case rates went to 0. They're not at 0 anymore, and we have been in touch with Mr. Sirwa, I think, in a general way through emails, but I can certainly try and increase our transparency information.
Dr. Grange, you mentioned that the mask, you said it's a muffler and not an air filter. Can you explain how that is? I mean, it's not one-way cloth, is it?
It's what, sorry?
It's not one-way cloth, right? So
No.
what goes in must come out?
One of the best ways to describe this is these masks are nothing new. Surgeons have been using these for decades. Not because they're afraid of what they're going to get when replacing a knee or pulling out a gallbladder, but because they don't want to give what they have, just normal bacteria in their mouth, into an open wound. So when I breathe out through my mouth and nose, this is right here catching it. And because my mouth and nose are moist, because I'm well hydrated, or even adequately hydrated, it sticks to the mask. And then when I take a breath in, I'm not breathing through the mask, I'm breathing around the mask. And anyone who has the dubious honor of wearing glasses can attest that when you breathe out, your glasses fog up. Because that's where the air's going, and that's where the air's coming from. But if anything, this is something to catch what you're breathing out. And the miracle behind a mask is it's non-specific. So this isn't just a COVID mask, this is a flu mask, an RSV mask, a pneumonia mask, a whatever you breathe out mask. Now there is a recommendation that you change your masks, you wash your masks, for the same reason why you don't wear your underpants the same pair for weeks on end. And you want to change that. But that's what the mask is something to catch what you have out. Because one of the problems with epidemiology is even if we had access to all the tests in town, and we can tell you how many people are testing positive, those are people who got tested, either because of travel, or because they felt bad, or for whatever reason. How many other people didn't get tested and are asymptomatic carriers or spreaders? We don't know. The only way we know is if we mandatory swab everyone's nose every 3 or 4 days, which I'll go out on the record, I'm against that. As much as I dislike masks, I hate having that swab up my nose. Doesn't mean I won't do it if I need to, but I don't think we need to do it. So we don't, even if we had access to all the testing, we won't know the true picture until weeks afterwards, until the hospitals are empty and we're able to say, oh, we had a peak back then. The downside behind public health and preventative medicine is that we don't have the insight. We can't walk around and say, Dr. Hart would have died because she got COVID, but she wore a mask because she's sick. Tricia would have got COVID if she didn't wear a mask on August 14th, but she did, so she's sick. We don't have that. So if we do everything right, we won't know. Everything will be normal, and then we get a complaint about having masks. If we do things wrong, then our hospitals and both up here and downstate are going to be filled past capacity, and we might have people die. Now, I don't think that's spreading fear. That's part of the knowledge. You have medical professionals that say we need to do everything we can to reduce resources. And one of the things we can do, and if we do it right, we won't know if we just diverted the next wave or the next mutation or what have you. We won't know. But again, this mask isn't a good mask you can't really breathe out of, because that's not the point. The point is not to filter what's coming in. Now, there are masks that do. They're called N95s, and you can't just pick them off the shelf. You have to have them properly fitted to you to make sure that there is a seal and the only air is coming through the filter. So you can't even go on Amazon and order an N95 and don't feel like you're protected. Or you can feel like you're protected, but you might not be because it wasn't properly fitted. And I'll tell you, if you hate breathing through this mask, you're going to hate breathing through that one even more. Because it requires a lot more force to move the air through that filter. Does that answer your question? Is that
Yeah, I see air going both ways, though.
What, sorry?
I see air going both ways.
Measure it differently, Cameron, to see it ourselves. So it's airflow dynamics. So the particles are what we care about more than the actual air, right? So we say air, we're worried about the COVID particles. So I've done a lot of studies on, like with high intensity lasers and whatever, to look at airflow dynamics and what goes. So if I'm not wearing a mask and I'm projecting my voice or singing, it's going to go 20 feet. Viral particles can go that far, which is why I recommend the face shield. That changes the airflow dynamics. So it still might get a few feet from you because it's not a mask, but it's going to change the airflow dynamics so it slows it down. The mask changes the airflow dynamics of projecting your voice a lot more. So yeah, sometimes it gets out, sometimes it gets through, but it doesn't go far. You know, you can be next to somebody and it's going to land on you because those are where the viral particles are going to go. Yeah, air goes everywhere, but the viral particles they don't have a force, they're going to land on you. And they've done a lot of studies on that. When you breathe air in, you're taking the ambient air, whatever's floating around in there. And so that depends on what other people are spreading. I don't know, that's a different way to explain it. I don't know if that's better or worse.
The air molecules are significantly smaller than the actual virus and virus particles. So when you're wearing this type of mask, this is both a muffler and an air filter for your car. This is an N95 mask that I have been properly fitted for and wearing because I am very cold. These type of masks, the cloth mask, when you breathe out, the air can escape, but it catches the viral particles. When you breathe in, you are getting air from the sides of the mask. That's what you're breathing in. So you're breathing in the ambient air in the room that may or may not contain the viral particles, which speaks to the point of why it's so important for viral, universal masking in order to make the environment itself safe. So that's the muffler piece of it.
And because this is a flimsy spandex type mask, it is sensitive to air pressure changes. So when I take a breath in, it will be sucked in because of the low pressure area in my mouth, sucking air in. Doesn't mean I'm getting much air through the mask because it's much easier for the air to flow around it. Now, if I was wearing a stiffer mask or one of those mask shields to keep it away from my face, you wouldn't see that. This is just a flimsy spandex mask that I like because it doesn't make me sweat as much.
Do any of you ever see COVID going away? Do you believe it's ever going to go away? And I mean the actual...
Absolutely. So pandemic, absolutely it'll go away. How quickly depends on a lot of things. The more it can run rampant, it goes through a lot more replications, more chances to mutate, more chances to be a bigger problem or a different problem somehow. But once it's kind of been, you know, we have a high enough level of vaccination and or natural immunity, like you get it a few times and you either die or you're one of the people that do well with it. We're going to have a level of, not exactly herd immunity because it won't prevent it from spreading. It'll become endemic. It'll become like a cold or a flu where like you're used to it happening, and we'll still have people once in a while that'll get sick, but it won't be overwhelming our system. And I wish I had read this more recently, but basically one of the infectious disease experts was talking about how at some point this will be endemic, which is, I'm trying to explain that in non-medical terms. You got it? Because I'm struggling with the actual definition in a way that's better explained.
I got it. And one of my hobbies is medical history. So back in 1918, 1919, there was a flu pandemic. Killed millions of people worldwide. Tens of millions. And there was talk, they actually went to Alaska and dug up some graves of some people who were buried warm and were able to find the virus and catalog the virus. And that was a big controversy at the time because they said, you're going to release this virus and it's going to kill everyone again. And what we found out was that it went through the system enough that it's now at pandemic or it's now at epidemic or normal levels, and our immune systems as populations have changed to where it can't kill us anymore. And that's what we're hoping to get to with vaccination and with slowing the transmission rate, because slowing the transmission rate also slows the mutation rate. And so eventually, yes, we'll get to where we don't think about COVID any more than anyone here thought about the 1918 pandemic 5 years ago. How long will we get there? Well, we'll get there a whole lot sooner if we do everything we can to put out this fire. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I guess we can move on to old business, return to school recommendations.
So we're here for obviously the reason that we're here. I just wanted to share with you all where we were when we met last and where we are today, as a point of just tracking community spread. So when we met on the 15th, and I don't know if you can see that image on the screen behind me, but we were at the presentation that I had put together for you to consider. We were at 92.46 cases per 100,000. We were in the orange or substantial community transmission at that time. And then a week later, on the 23rd, we were at 141.67 cases per 100. So a significant change in a week's time. We were in the red at that time. And when I look today, yesterday was a more promising day, but today we are in Aroostook County. We are back at 143.17 per 100,000. So little dip yesterday, back up today. So we're still in the red, or the high community transmission, which is why we're here discussing what we're discussing. I did put out a survey, a part 2 survey, essentially the same thing as the previous one. This time I asked for email address receipts, just so that people weren't apt to put 1,000 responses. In a little over 24 hours, we have 569 responses, and you can see on the screen behind me, with regards to FKES students, we're at a spread of about 51% asking for optional, 40% asking for universal. We did have the third choice for requiring masks, and I do have to apologize that the way that I wrote this is actually not entirely correct. So the way that response reads is: require masks at FKES and make masks optional at CHS VRMS due to students having the vaccine available in grades 7 through 12. There are a small group of students in grade 7 that are still 11 years old that will not turn 12 between now and October. So there are a few students in grade 7 that don't have the vaccine available. CHS, you'll see the spread at 60% optional, 34% universal. Parent guardian at Fort Kent Elementary, 53% to 42%. CHS parent guardians, 47 to about 40%. And if you add the orange there, it's almost 50-50. The staff members are the ones that really changed compared to the first survey. You'll see that the majority of FKES staff members are asking for required masking or universal masking. Same thing at CHS. About 66% of the CHS staff members are asking for universal masking. And then your community members at large are split right down the middle at 47.7%. So like Toby said a while ago, a week has changed things. So that's where we are, and that's what I wanted to share with you all in those regards.
Keith, thoughts or opinions, anything you'd like to share?
Just to echo what Ben and Toby were saying, obviously the situation's changed quite drastically over the past week, and we need to react accordingly.
Toby?
At this point, I'm inclined to listen to our medical professional. We have somebody that, are we required to have somebody on staff? Are we required to contract somebody?
We're required to have a medical practitioner as a district, yes.
And I'm inclined to strongly consider what she's recommending. I think the deviations for the teachers, if that's something that's safe, we should do it. I don't want this anymore. I just want everything to be normal too. And this sucks. It absolutely sucks. But we've heard from, I think, every practitioner in the St. John Valley in the past 48 hours. When I'm working with clients and I tell them, don't do that. I'm your lawyer, don't do that. I like to think they listen to me, especially when I'm giving legal advice, not personal advice. So I'm inclined to listen to the people who know more than me about this. And I mean, that's why I'm inclined to listen to the recommendations. And if the situation changes and our advisor believes we can safely change, go to a non-mask situation, by all means. I mean, it was nice to not wear them anymore. I think we should defer to the people, to the person that we have here, the person that we're working with. And hope that things get better as quickly as they get bad. I mean, I'd like to think that in 3 weeks, the hospital is just dealing with your infections. That would be nice.
Isabel?
So clearly things have changed a lot from last week. We don't know what it's going to look like next week. And I don't think it's going to get much better if we don't try to stop it and nip it in the butt right away. You brought up a good point about how like students need to see, especially the younger kids need to see like your facial expressions and everything like that. Do we, like, are students still having those shields on their desk like they did last year?
So you're talking about the trifold shields? Yes, we have those, but it's not a replacement for a mask. So even though we have them, we can use them as an extra layer of safety. We do have them, but at no point can we say you can take off your mask behind a shield.
I'm talking more for like the teacher's perspective, where if she's at the front of the class, socially distanced, if those kids like have their shields up on that, at least the first row.
Right, so we have the SOP that we need to follow, and I'm going to defer to Monique if I make a mistake here. The SOP does say that in order to be a universally masked school, all individuals must be masked. Now, I don't know if the face shield with a gaiter to block is a substitute. I'm hearing Dr. Hart saying she's comfortable with that, so I guess we'd have to look into whether or not with distance that's okay. When it
gaiter has to come up over your mouth and nose, and so we did have some people who did not wear masks last year. It was okay to face shield and gaiter, and they found within less than a week that that was absolutely miserable. It's worse than wearing a mask. So if you're wearing a shield so they can see your face, but you have to wear a gaiter, it's defeating that purpose.
Right now, we're encouraging outdoor classrooms, and I know that's hard because all of your stuff's inside, and 90 degrees, you're not going to want to go outside anyway, but we are encouraging as much outdoor learning space right now before the winter hits, just so that we can take those masks off, we can see each other's face. So that's our primary focus right now, is to encourage that.
Good. Sarah?
I just want to say thank you to everybody who showed up and shared their thoughts and feelings. I know that's hard. I have learned a lot in the last 36 hours. We have gotten a lot of emails, and that was one thing that I had thought of, like, man, it would be nice to share some of these emails, because I learned a lot through the emails, but it seems like we covered a lot of that ground tonight. I think nobody wants remote. So whatever we have to do to go back to protect against that, I am all for. And like Toby, I guess I would defer to the guidance of our local medical, whatever that word is, person, advisor. That's the one. Thank you. So that's where I'm at.
Leroy?
Well, for me, first of all, I'm actually very thankful that I have the employer that I do, because I was able to literally respond to probably about 99% of the emails, text messages, Facebook messages, phone calls over the last 2 days. My wife will probably say that she hasn't seen me in 2 days. As a matter of fact, I left the house tonight with my daughter crying because she missed her dada. But this is why we're here. We have decisions that have to be actually made. One of the things that concerns me is that we're talking about all these layers, and we have such esteemed people here talking about all the layers and how at some point in time this is going to go away. But the only layer that you guys have, besides being vaccinated for those that are, is your mask. Not one of you is sitting 6 feet apart. So we have no social distancing there. So I find it, to me, I have to balance what, not only what I feel, but what those who put us in these positions feel. Also have to balance what the medical field feels. And that's often a very difficult position. So, you know, anybody that's sitting up here is, in my opinion, A+. We may not always agree on everything, but one of the things that I did was I reached out to a very personal friend of mine, and because I was kind of conflicted, I guess, so to speak. And this person told me that if I voted for what I truly believed to be the right thing, and I was honest with myself and everybody else with what consequences may be there and may not be there, and I could sleep at night by doing so, then I had voted right. So I sit here and I still am against the universal masking.
Abby?
I think like Leroy, this is probably an impossible position to be in because you're way of making someone happy and someone else unhappy. I did say before, I'm not a parent, I don't work in the school, and I'm not a medical provider, so I can't speak on any of those three things, but I think listening to everyone, the most important thing, obviously, is that our kids are in school, or your kids are in school, and not remote. I think that as far as the social emotional learning, that's something I do a lot of in my work. And while masks may or may not have a part in it, then obviously remote learning does play a part in it because we see kids and parents struggling at home with remote learning. So with all that said, and all the emails on both sides, which are very helpful, although a lot to read and take the time for, they are very helpful to someone like myself that isn't dealing with any of this firsthand. So with all that said, I would move for mandating masking, at least until our numbers go down. I do have a question for, I guess, Monique or Mr. Sirwa, just clarifying to what Lynn's point was about wearing, or in combining Dr. Hart's perspective of wearing a face shield, 6 foot distance, and being vaccinated. That is not a possibility unless they have, did you say the garter? I don't know what you mean.
Well, he was talking about universal masking, if that counts. So to be considered universal masking, if you're going to wear a face shield, you have to wear a gaiter that comes up and covers your mouth and nose.
Can I ask a question to that? What are the, so we say, like, what are the consequences of making an exception? Can we say we are universal masking, and these are the very specific times where we say that it is okay? Someone in that room is positive, then the teacher has to quarantine. Is that the consequence? What are the consequences?
Once pool testing is completely up and running, that would probably be okay. But right now, where pool testing isn't up and running yet, just because we're still in the process of it, you would have more kids quarantining if that teacher were to test positive.
So it would be if the teacher is positive.
If the teacher is positive.
If the teacher is positive, because they wouldn't be considered truly masked at that time.
Gotcha.
Right. So the odds are less because you're talking about a vaccinated person, and the gains are higher. So it's a cost benefit. But yeah, you have to have the whole class out if they turn positive.
Sorry, yeah, so I guess the first time it was mentioned, you mentioned SOP, which I don't know what that stands for, if someone would like to clarify, but, are we saying that like at a state level, we are not allowed to do this until, I guess I'm confused, like what we are and are not allowed to mandate?
So on the screen behind me is the standard operating procedure, SOP, from the Maine Center of Disease Control and Prevention. This is what we have to follow with regards to who quarantines, when they quarantine, all of those things. So I'm just going to skip right to that section because that's what we're talking about. And the definition of quarantine is pretty much still the same as last year. Close contact, is still defined as 6 feet or more within 15 minutes in a 24-hour period. And close contacts must quarantine for 10 days. But this year, the difference is there are exceptions that did not exist last year. So I heard one of the parents mention that, last year we had masks and we still had to quarantine. That's changed this year because of vaccinations, because of pool testing, all those. So if you look at number one, a close contact, staff or student, if they're vaccinated and the exposure occurred more than 14 days after they were fully vaccinated, they would not have to quarantine. So that's one exception. If the close contact had COVID-19 themselves and they're within a 90-day window of when they had COVID, they would not have to quarantine because they have the natural immunity. If the close contact participates in the pool testing program, and that's what Minnick just mentioned when we have that up and running, if those individuals are in the pool testing, they will not have to quarantine because they're getting tested weekly. And then number four, if we have a universal masking policy, in a classroom, you would not have to quarantine. That does not count in the cafeteria or the gym or the school bus. It only counts in the classroom. So those are the exceptions that didn't exist last year.
I just heard a couple things and I'm confused. So the shield for teachers teaching, but they're 6 feet. Didn't it just say that 6 feet away for the 15 minutes, then they don't have to quarantine? So if the teacher has it, the kids won't have to quarantine because they're more than 6 feet.
Universal masking has nothing to do with shields. So the shields, just wipe away. Shields have nothing to do with any of this SOP. This SOP makes zero mention of shields. It only talks about masking.
I got a quick question. At what point would the students go remote if they're still wearing masks and you have like an outbreak in school? Is that still on the table, or are we guaranteed not to go remote if we still have masks? It's a case-by-case determination, and for us, it's based on, A, do we have enough staff to operate the school? That's number one. And last year we had a case where we didn't have enough staff to operate the school because we didn't have enough subs to fill in the classroom, so that's number one. Number two is if we have a significant outbreak where multiple cohorts are impacted and you run the risk of having widespread in the school, that would be a second indicator. Those are primarily the two that we would look at. Right, Monique?
Yeah. How am I doing?
You're doing good. Good.
So when we went remote, like Ben said last year, the first time it was because of our ability to teach and staffing, because of staff. The CDC at some point can step in if there's a mass outbreak and we are still in school and we have large numbers. At that point, they can step in and make the decision for us. But lots of times it's a district-by-district decision based on your numbers.
What would those numbers be? Have we even determined that, or looked at that stuff? No?
It's one of those, you don't know it till you see it, unfortunately. For us, it's primarily based on staffing. That's going to be the primary factor. Luckily, we have a good amount of staff that are vaccinated, so with that in place and universal masking and pool testing, hopefully we would not have to quarantine staff, which means that even though we have to maybe quarantine some students, we'll have staff there for the others.
What's the ETA on pool testing?
We posted our pool testing coordinator position today with a start anytime distinction. We already got a couple of applicants. So, what's it? Peter? It's not Peter. We're looking for a nurse, so you got to have your nursing. So we hope to fill that very soon.
So I appreciate all the correspondence from the medical personnel that we've received over the last 36 hours or so. Also from the public that, I mean, we still have a majority that still support the optional masking that we came up with the last time. Not to discredit any of the medical people, but I don't know. I just don't see an end to it, and I see us playing this role for a long, long time. And I think the psychological damage to the kids far outweighs the risk of them getting COVID in school. The cases that we have in Aroostook County right now, from what Dr. Hart got back to us with, none of them are under, what was it, 40 or so? So, I mean, we don't have, it's not impacting our kids right now, even though that's coming from somewhere saying that it is.
Well, it is. I mean, we had to cancel a girls' soccer game against Central Aroostook yesterday. That girls' team is quarantined, as is Caribou now in Presque Isle.
Okay, but at the same time, and Nick, you and I were both there yesterday. And granted, there's no requirement for a mask outdoors, right?
Yep.
You were sitting on the bleachers right in the thick of everyone with no mask on. Everyone else, did you see a mask anywhere there? Was anyone socially distant?
Outside versus inside in the schools. And right now, the CDC and DOE recommendation in schools is universal masking.
Right, but from a common sense standpoint, does it make any sense that we can go to that soccer game yesterday, sit there shoulder to shoulder in our folding nylon chairs or on the bleachers? We don't have to wear a mask. But if we walk 150 yards to the left and we go into the school building, all of a sudden we got to be masked. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I don't think you can, yeah, and I don't think you can just put common sense to this virus. I don't think you can. I think we really have to just follow the science and follow.
But if you're following the science, why wouldn't you have a mask on?
Because I was outside.
But you were not socially distant with anyone. And I'm not trying to put you on point, but it's just we were both there. And I looked over and I'm like, you know, she's been telling the kids all week long, mask, 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 vaccine, and now you're sitting there like that. I mean, it doesn't set a very good example for all the soccer players that are out there. And
I'm not telling the kids to mask outside. I'm telling them to mask inside.
And I'm just saying it makes no sense to me, and it makes no sense to those people that want the ability to choose what's best for their kid. It's like Dr. Hart, you had mentioned an acceptable risk for kids being out on the playground. Who determines that acceptable risk?
It's a very good question. And the biggest thing that we've seen in our experience over the last year and a half are that kids are emotionally traumatized the most by being out of school. So the biggest problems we've seen social emotionally are kids not being in school, and with the current rules, if they're not universally masked indoors, they will have to go home.
Well, I think that's twofold also. I mean, you heard from Ms. Collins about the damage that it's done to her son, that he figured he was protected with the mask and all of a sudden he gets COVID. And I mean, I think we are in a position where we still have a right to make a choice on our own kids.
The choice is not just for your kids, like you said over and over again. We accept that you by law cannot drink and drive because it is not safe to you, but it's also not safe to the members of the community. We've accepted that you by law have to have your children wearing a seatbelt in the car because it is not safe to them if there's an accident, but then they become a projectile. It's not safe to those around them. It's the same kind of concept. I agree, as also a parent, child that are not school age, I want to be able to make decisions for them. But you're not at home, you're not in your private entity making those decisions. This is a public institution where your decisions affect those around you. We accept these rules to exist in harmony in a community, and one of those right now is universal masking. It sucks, but that's the way that we are going to get through this as unscathed as possible as a community. It isn't just your decision for your kids, you're impacting the community by those decisions.
I understand that, but that works both ways. Just because of what you think doesn't mean that's right compared to what we think. I mean, we got to meet in the middle somewhere. And I think the optional masking with the pooled testing.
Science, this is based on experts in the field, this is based on
let's say I had COVID, and I came up to you without a mask, and I said hi, and then I turned around and left. So it was 3 seconds. Chances are you're not going to get it from that. I'll know roughly within 6 feet, face-to-face, roughly 15 minutes of interaction in an area that has no ventilation, no air exchange. So you're breathing the same air for about 15 minutes. Outdoors, you don't have that. You have the atmosphere, everything's diluted. You have wind currents, even if it's just a small, gentle breeze that you may or may not notice. It's moving things around. That's why the recommendations are outside, you're safe. Now, that doesn't mean that if we're outside and we're within a foot of each other talking back and forth, that just because we're outside, you're magically going to be protected. If you're in that situation, you probably should wear a mask. But that's the difference between indoor versus outdoor, is it's different environments. And we know this has affected the transmission rates. We didn't know it so much last time, a year ago, but we've learned this over the past. We've been able to say which situations stack up to increase infectivity. And taking kids, putting them in a classroom, even socially distanced without masks, eventually will saturate that environment.
So
that's the science behind it. And that's why Dr. Hart was saying if we can get the kids outside, it's even better because you have the air currents, you have more air in the atmosphere, you have more spread to lower the number of viral particles that everyone's exposed to. If I give you one virus of COVID, you probably won't, more than likely, you won't catch the disease from one. But if I give you 1 million, yeah, you're going to get it. And so we're doing every part of the layering is to decrease the number of viruses that you or the children will potentially be exposed to. And it depends situation to situation. Indoors versus outdoors, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, socially distanced versus not. You're stacking it's like you're trying to stack your hand the best you can. So again, I hope that answered your question about why indoor versus outdoor, why that made a difference.
thank you. Toby, I won't mention the southern border tonight, so. Anyways, does anyone want to make a motion?
I do.
One way or the other?
I would like to make a motion for universal masking for red and orange, optional at blue, and discretion of our medical advisor for yellow, or at any time it seems like the local transmission rate warrants that. And which would include if we have pooled testing, and that works out to allow for teachers to have some exceptions based on medical guidance, that could be worked in as well. That would be my motion. Do I need anything else?
Question.
What's your question?
Effective tomorrow?
Effective tomorrow.
Okay.
Second.
Can we repeat the motion?
Yeah.
So the 4 severities, blue would be optional, the higher 2, red and orange, would be universal masking, and then yellow would be at the discretion of our medical guidance. And she could also guide us if we're in orange, but that's an outbreak of Holton. She could say, okay, it doesn't really apply here. We're looking at, she's got a pulse on the hospital, right? So she could say, it doesn't really apply to us. This is what makes sense for us. And then the pool testing, she could, if teachers, she could allow some teacher exceptions that would allow the shield. If there's pool testing, then however the quarantine, that would have to work. We could work that in.
Sorry, question. As they were asking, so they would be okay to wear the shield with the
what I was told, just to clarify.
We have a second?
Toby, I think said.
Toby, second. Discussion? Can we come up with something a lot less wordy and simple? Seriously, I mean,
Okay.
that's,
How
I
about
think it's
the
excessively confusing.
Discretion of our medical advisor?
Yeah, but,
Yes, well, so what I want to get away from is last year with, when we would have the dashboard, and it was that, we had numbers, and we had 7, and there was 7 positive cases, Ben's phone would ring off the hook. I'm trying to get away from that.
Thank you.
Did you see Ben's proposed motion he sent today? Which is very similar to what you said, but a lot cleaner and simpler.
Yeah, but his had recommended at Orange.
Which is fine, because we made our motion last week on optional when we were in Orange
Right.
with pool
That's
testing.
not my recommendation. That's not my motion because of the guidance that we have gotten from, we were in Orange last Monday, and by Saturday it was out of control. That's what I'm worried about. Toby?
Sarah, can I read your motion to make sure I captured it?
I think we might be revising it, Giselle.
Okay.
What if I had proposed something to the board earlier?
Oh, it was CDC guidelines with the exception with input from the medical.
And I don't know if this gets us here, but what I proposed was something like.
It's right behind on the screen, Toby.
Oh,
I don't
I'll get
know.
on the phone.
Okay.
I can't see that so well anymore, must be getting there. Follow recommendations from the Maine CDC and Maine Department of Education unless our medical consultant suggests otherwise, in which case the board, upon notice from the superintendent, will need to consider medical consultant's recommended deviation.
Would the future allowances fall under this?
That would be a recommended deviation.
Okay.
I don't know, with this, I guess my question for Dr. Hart is, if we follow DOE guidelines, does that comport with what Sarah's saying?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have a caveat where I need the medical stuff, but in terms of what the DOE guidelines are currently, yesterday is when I started. So,
Okay.
I wanna do whatever keeps the kids in school. And if we can make allowances for teachers in a way based on the current rules to keep the kids in school, even with a positive case, that's what I want to do. So that's the part that I'm currently missing because I'm behind. I'm sorry.
I guess what I was trying to, yeah, go ahead.
I believe if you go with Toby's motion, even in a low community
Yeah.
transmission rate, you still have to mask because the CDC says they're still going to recommend it. I believe that's still going to be their
Right.
recommendation.
And I guess that's what,
DOE guidance right now is universal masking, pre-K through 12,
No matter what level of community transmission.
without regard.
and I guess I was trying to be a little bit more middle ground, because if it's low transmission, maybe like Ocean County is big, maybe that doesn't apply here. I guess is what I was hoping.
I don't like any language with the CDC and the DOE in it because it takes away our local control.
But by having the statement that exceptions or guidance from the medical staff. to-
Sure. What I had just simply suggested was universal masking at red, recommended masking at orange, and then optional at yellow and blue. And that was simply based on the conversations you had as a board last meeting, because we were not in red.
My concern for the not asking before we get to red is that we're gonna get to red, because we have to prevent getting to there, so universal masking before we're in the crisis is the point prevent getting.
But you need to keep in mind that when we were in Orange for Aroostook County, we had no issues here at all. It was in southern and eastern Aroostook. So,
Last, I can't remember which day, I had a bunch of patients that were positive in, it was in Alaska, so it's not here, but it marches forward before the numbers show it. And I was trying to avoid a back and forth with myself, honestly, all the time about what's the local thing happening, by saying, screw it, yellow through red. If you guys want to make it more St. John Valley oriented because the county is so big, I can do that, but I can't do that on an everyday basis. I can do that, like, check in once a week, and I can, if I see something happening, you know, make sure I let you guys know. That I can do.
Last year, that's what we were doing, I mean, on a weekly basis, reassessing the situation. So this is a fluid thing, so then what we can talk about right now may not apply tomorrow, so it is really fluid.
I apologize. Last week before I was school physician, I was in La La Land. All my kids are vaccinated. I was just kind of like putting my head in the sand a little bit. I was in school. I will admit that. And if you would have asked me, if anyone would have asked, like, I just didn't even think that we would be universally masked. It didn't occur to me last week. So if you would have asked me last week, I knew it was coming. I could have told you.
And it's here, we're quarantined.
Yeah.
I also think it's a matter of time before we have mandatory masking in the communities again.
Just a quick one, I hope it's hypothetical, but this year we're sitting here talking about mandating what people do with their bodies in masks. And again, I hope this is hypothetical. Are we going to be sitting here next year talking about mandating what people have to inject into their bodies? Are we, you know, it's a slippery slope, freedom, and it goes away very easily.
Sure.
And, you know, when you know, we talk about, you know, drunk driving and things like that, that's from a legislative body, not unelected individuals. Where do we draw that line? Because I guarantee you, as much as I want to say it's hypothetical, we're going to be sitting here in a year, 2 years, having a discussion about mandating vaccines, mandating boosters every 6 months, and it's going to keep going and going and going. These are our bodies, these are our children, our freedom. We look out what is best for our children, we make those decisions. Some people make good decisions, some people make bad. I absolutely 100% respect every teacher, student, parent who chooses to mask or not mask, but it is a very slippery slope. And again, I hope this is hypothetical, but we have seen things get, you know, run away before.
okay, we'll bring the discussion back to the board.
What about one of the options presented to us last week in the back-to-school plan? One of the options was mask use in schools will be required until community spread of COVID returns to moderate or low, which would imply substantial and high, so orange and red, and it will be recommended that non-vaccinated individuals wear a mask. With the caveat that if our medical advisor sees something coming or relaxing, that could be fluid.
And I'm happy to take questions, so say it's like orange and you guys are like, hey, that's on Holton. Like, I'm happy to override. But I would like a general set of guidelines, not just I'm on call 24/7 to figure out what we're doing tomorrow.
Can we hear what Sarah's first motion was from Giselle? Just to get some idea of where she started. Because Giselle wrote something down, presumably.
I wrote what Sarah said.
All right.
Sarah said, and you seconded, to move to universal masks for red and orange, optional at blue, discretion of medical advisor at yellow, and medical advisor can further guide us on what makes sense for MSAD 27, effective August 26th, tomorrow.
not, other than swapping the yellow and blue,
Right.
it would make sense. The problem is you didn't do them in order. I think that's what makes it sound confusing. If it's red, orange, mandatory, yellow, discretion of our medical staff, and blue, no masks,
Or optional.
or optional, then I think that that's simpler and flows better.
Okay.
Well, switch the words.
I think she's gonna move to amend her own motion.
I would move, do I have to move to amend the motion? To move, I'd like to move to amend my earlier motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I would like to alter my motion to swap blue and yellow. Do I have to say it all over again?
I don't know.
Okay, so the motion on the table, Abby, is for universal masking for red and orange categories. Yellow would be at the discretion of our medical advisor. Blue would be optional masking. And the medical advisor could provide input to our local communities in any of those if it is appropriate.
Just have a question. Would it require action of the board to change the masking rules at the recommendation of the medical advisor?
I guess I'm open to that. You're saying yes?
Well, I don't,
Yeah.
I mean, to echo what, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir, but you're up in the corner. I mean, we are a legislative body,
Yeah.
and we do have a responsibility. And although I like Dr. Hart, ultimately it falls on us to make the decision. I think if she makes a recommendation, the board needs to approve it or reject it. I think that's our job.
Outside of the color designations that.
Outside of the color designation. So if she comes in and says, like, it's blue, but oh my God, the circus is coming and they all have COVID, and tells us that, we should convene and decide to do something about it. Likewise, if it's orange and she's like, it's all in Holt and we're in the clear here, there's nobody, I think we should have to at least make a motion and decide. I think it's the board's job, not the doctor's job.
Just to clarify, I agree with the legislative body, but obviously you're elected to these positions, those should be more the CDC.
No, I know, and the distinction's important, and I thank you for it. I think it's an important distinction. We're making our decisions based on the information these folks are providing us, but ultimately it's our decision. And I think that's good. I agree. I mean, I think that's how it should be. And although I don't agree with you on everything, I completely agree with you on that.
I still don't like the orange. I think last week we agreed that optional masking with pooled testing would make orange acceptable for optional. What has changed that we can't?
We're here a week later.
But what has changed on we shift back into orange? Because as we were in orange last week, this region was not really affected. We have the ability to call an emergency meeting like we did tonight and make adjustments on the fly. Nothing has to be set in stone, but we had a good plan in place last week.
I did not agree with last week's plan, and this is my motion. Based on the vast amounts of medical input we have received in the last 36 hours.
So your motion, the wording right now on the yellow gives Dr. Hart the authority to determine the mask?
She makes a recommendation, and then we would convene to say we agree or disagree. It gives us.
No, I don't think it's fair to put all that on her, and I don't think it's fair to take that away from our decision-making ability. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Okay, so what if we modified it again to,
Well, no, it says recommend, you said her recommendation,
right, but I could make a motion to modify it again.
if you so
I'm
choose.
getting good at this. To move the yellow to recommended, or optional masking, recommended masking, whatever it's optional for vaccinated recommended for unvaccinated, is that what the CDC says, or that was just stuff that you put in?
That's stuff that was just based on our previous conversations. Please know that I'm going to be in direct communication with Dr. Hart. So as my responsibility as your superintendent, I would contact the chairman to schedule a meeting if she gave me information that was
So I
concerned.
don't need to include that in the?
I don't know that you need to.
Okay.
But that's my responsibility.
That would make it easier to go with the option 2 that was presented last week by the school return to school thing, where it's required for red and orange, recommended, optional for moderate and low.
Giselle, you completely lost yet?
She's amended it a second time?
I have to make a motion to amend the earliest motion.
Amend the amendment?
Amend the amendment, sure. Okay, let's go with that.
Are you going to include anything for the teachers?
I would like to.
Do you want to make another amendment?
That was in the first one. Can we scrap it, start a new one?
You could ask to withdraw your motion.
Oh, I would like to withdraw my first motion. Do I need to
With
get
all
a second
amendments.
on
Well, what, I mean, I would recommend, why don't we vote on the motion we put forward and see if the board supports it? Instead of withdrawing the motion and continuing to haggle down this thing,
that? All right.
see what the board says. If we vote it down, let's change it.
Okay.
If we agree to it, it stands. I mean, we can't spend all night needling over words.
So are we going to address the teacher's request with a separate motion?
That was the first, that was included.
That was in the first motion.
In the motion.
That was a deviation that was
That was a
allowed by the.
deviation.
Okay.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Abby?
Abby doesn't know what we're voting on.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, I don't think I'm the only one.
No. The motion as it stands is.
Required masking in substantial and high. Recommended masking at moderate and optional masking at low, with the exception that if, at Dr. Hart's recommendation, we can make amendments to
We can make deviations.
and allowing teachers to shield.
That would be a deviation, I believe.
Okay. So just to address one further question, I think Gary's concern is that if at Orange we are having an outbreak in Holton, are we able to then address it ourselves and say, okay,
I think what Ben was clarifying was that at any time, she can take input to him and he can take input to us. That's how it happened last year. We basically need a baseline. And then we can make adjustments as necessary. Right, because one of your hangups is not having local input, right? So having our medical advisor provide some local input helps alleviate some of that.
I think the more transparent we are with the public, that this is when we move from masking to not, is going to be beneficial for all of you, having a concrete plan. So whatever you guys adopt, we're going to advertise the heck out of it tomorrow so everyone is clear on when we do one thing or the other.
I just don't want to see our kids in masks 1 minute longer than they need to be. And by having orange mandatory, that takes that ability away from us. Like Abby said, if Holton's got a problem, we're completely clean, hospital's empty up here, they're treating the ear infections like Toby said, good, they don't need to wear a mask. With your motion, they still have to wear a mask unless we call an emergency meeting. And you know darn well we're not going to call an emergency meeting for that scenario.
But we need to have something.
Ben's suggested motion
We've got a motion
I think
on
based
the recommended.
I think based on our medical tonight, did not feel that orange should be optional, orange should be mandated.
Dr. Hart, do you think it's reasonable for us to be wearing masks in an orange situation if it's just a Holton situation? Presque North, we're good. No hospitalizations. People are pretty good. Do we want to have our kids still in masks?
I'm fairly certain that that's unlikely to have the county orange and have it completely contained in Holden. I know too many people going all over the place. We're far away, but people travel for work pretty frequently. My husband's in Holden twice a week. Teaching people how to fly. So I think that it would be rare for orange to be contained in a way that's reasonable. Last week, like I said, I saw it coming. It was a matter of Oscar, we didn't have it on the CDC website.
Any further discussion? Abby, how do you vote?
What's that?
How do you vote?
I guess I would vote to approve Sarah's motion with the hope that, you know, that Dr. Harder is pretty transparent with if the outbreak in the unlikely event is contained in Holden, we would receive that information and could make that decision for ourselves.
Leroy?
Nay.
Sarah?
Yes.
Nay. Isabel?
Yes.
Toby?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-2. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Thank you, everyone, for coming.